Lonely rancher found Apache girl hanging on a tree with a stinking white man don't forgive. Under the merciless sun of New Mexico Calder Wyatt rode, with a slow, steady rhythm dust lifting, with every step of his dun mare. He had been trailing a lost here for a day the prince gone soft in the cracked earth. The silence out here was sacred, broken only by the faint creak of leather, the whine of wind, and the occasional call of a distant hawk. Calder liked it this way, alone, quiet, predictable. But then he heard it so faint it might have been wind. A sound, like a breath that had forgotten how to breathe. He froze in his saddle head, tilting, heart slowing. It came again, a whimper weak and sharp like a thread, about to snap. He dismounted quickly, tying the reins to a dead limb. With his rifle slung over his back, he moved through the scraggly junipers and boulders until he came upon a clearing, ringed by old cottonwoods. And there, beneath the oldest tree, he saw her. She was hanging by the wrist arms, stretched above her, her body limp like a broken doll. Her feet barely touched the dirt. Her skin was sundark, and dust covered her long black hair matted with sweat and blood. Her chest rose in shallow, erratic breaths, but she was alive. Cedar's eyes snapped to the crude wooden sign nailed to the tree above her head. The words were scrolled in thick, red paint, angry and jagged. White man, don't forgive. He stepped back, involuntarily bile rising in his throat. The air thickened. A warning message, a curse. He glanced around, scanning the ridges of the rocks. No movement, no sound, just the wind, brushing through dead leaves like whispers. His hand went to the knife on his belt. Christ, he muttered. What the hell did they do to you? The girl stirred barely. Her head lolled forward, and he saw the raw burn marks where the rope bit into her wrists. He swallowed hard. You hear me, girl? He asked, voice hoarse. No response. I am not here to hurt you, he said softer, almost to himself. His boots crunched forward. Closer, he could see her face now, young, maybe 18, with a high brow and a strong jaw, her cheeks hollow from thirst. There was dried blood on her lip. He reached up, touched the rope. It was twisted mesquite fiber, harsh and bold. Whoever tied it had meant for her to suffer, not just hang. He pulled out his knife. His fingers trembled. That sign, it screamed at him. He heard echoes of things he never said, never did, and yet it made him guilty. It made him hesitate. But she groaned again, and that sound undid him. I ain't all of them, he whispered, blade slipping into the rope. I ain't that. But with one firm slice, the rope gave way. She fell forward, and he caught her just in time. Her body was warm, burning even, and light in his arms, like she had no bones left. Her eyes fluttered open, dark, frightened, unfocused. Calder eased her down to the ground, one knee in the dust. He poured water from his canteen onto a cloth and dabbed her cracked lips. Easy now, he said. You're safe, at least for the moment. She blinked. Once, then again, still no words, but her hand clutched weakly at his sleeve. He looked at the sign one last time, then at her. Then he pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. You got a name, he asked gently. Nothing. Guess we'll find one for you, he murmured. He stood lifting her with effort, cradling her like something not yet broken. But for now, you're with me. And with that, Calder Wyatt stepped back into the wilderness, carrying a girl marked for death and a secret heavy enough to hang a man. The sun was dipping low by the time Calder reached his ranch. Just a modest outpost, clinging to the edges of a desert too, stubborn to forget violence. A single windmill creaked on the edge of the fence line, and the old barn sagged like it mourned something. The house itself was one room and a loft roof patched with old sheet metal, but it stood solid and honest like the man who built it. Calder eased the girl from the saddle and carried her inside. She was fevered, her head pressed to his chest, whispering breaths like dry leaves, skittering across a stone floor. He laid her on the cot and unwrapped the coat, careful not to startle her. Her eyes fluttered open for a moment, dark and wide and distant, but they watched him. The lantern flickered against the walls as he poured water into a metal basin and set it near her feet. He grabbed a clean cloth from a shelf and knelt. Her legs were bruised, scraped, one ankle. Swollen rope burns marred her wrists like brands. I ain't gonna hurt you, he said, more to break the silence than to expect any reply. Just cleaning up a bit. He dipped the cloth into the warm water and wrung it out. Then slowly, reverently, he took her right foot and placed it in the basin. She flinched, just barely. He paused, waited. When she did not pull away, he began to wash the dust and blood from her skin, his movements gentle, precise like he was, touching something sacred. The water turned red and brown. He worked in silence, careful not to meet her gaze. For too long, though, he felt it on him, like a blade drawn halfway unsure, whether to strike or fall. Her lips parted once as if to speak, but no sound came. Reckon you don't talk much. He muttered, not unkindly. That's all. Right. Silence is better than most things most days. He finished the first foot, then the other. She let him. When he was done, he wrapped them in soft cloth strips and set her feet gently on a folded blanket. You remind me of a river I used to camp near, he said, quietly almost to himself. It was dry most of the year. Looked dead, but after the rains it ran fast and deep. Had a name, but the locals called it Quiet. Snake. Don't know why, just quiet. He looked at her again, studying her. Features in the lamplight. Cheekbones, sharp as ridgelines, lips cracked, but full dark lashes thick with sand. She was young, too young for this kind of suffering. But there was something old. Behind her eyes, something that did not flinch from pain, only waited for it to pass. I'll call you Lena, he said, softly. Just for now. You look like Elena. Quiet but strong. She blinked, once slowly, no protest, no nod, just breath. Just Calder stood hands wet and reached for a blanket to cover her. He tucked it around her shoulders, then stepped back. If you're hungry, there's beans. Not much, but better than air. Still no answer. He grabbed his bedroll and dragged it toward the door. He would sleep out by the barn tonight. Give her the space. It was not right for her to be watched by a stranger, especially not one with blood in his past and questions in his eyes. Before he stepped outside, he looked back one last time. She had shifted slightly. Eyes closed, lips no longer trembling. The basin still sat beside the cot, tinged with the color of what had been done to her. He picked it up and emptied it outside, watching the water soak into the thirsty ground. Inside, she dreamed of fire of horses, of ropes cutting skyward, and of hands, rough but gentle, washing the hurt away, without asking anything in return. The days that followed passed with the slow rhythm of desert life, but the silence inside the house was different now, thicker, charged with something just beyond reach. Lena, as Calder still, called her 8 when he brought food, though never much. She moved with caution, eyes always alert, posture tight like an animal who had been caged too long. She never spoke, but he caught her watching him when she thought he would not notice. At night, Calder left her the cot and took to the barn, his rifle beside him. He pretended it was to give her space. But the truth was more complicated. He was afraid not of her, but of what her presence meant. That sign on the tree still burned in his mind. White men don't forgive. Whoever wrote it had meant for her to die slow, and whoever they were, they might still be coming. It was 3 mornings later, when he first saw the blueprint, slightly smaller than his, newer than his, and angled toward the barn. Calder squatted beside it in the hard-packed dirt and studied the heel. Military, issue cavalry. The print was fresh, no, more than a few hours old. He rose, slowly, eyes scanning the ridgeline. Nothing but sagebrush and heat shimmer. Back inside, Lena sat by the window, still and silent. She did not look at him when he entered, but her body tensed. You seen anyone? He asked. She said nothing, only pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I think we've got company, Calder murmured more to himself. That evening, he kept the lantern low and stayed by the porch, rifle across his knees. The wind had died. Coyotes howled far off, and the stars blinked into view like ghosts, waking up. Lena did not sleep. He could hear her moving inside, pacing the floor in slow circles. It was around midday, the next day when the rider came. Dust curled behind the chestnut horse as it approached. The man at top it wore the blue and gold of the U.S. Cavalry. His rifle was holstered, his hat low, his jaw rough with stubble. Calder stepped down from the porch, one hand resting casually on his belt. The soldier reined in his horse and squinted down. You called her Wyatt, depends who's asking. Lieutenant Graham, Dust Hollow, station. We're tracking a fugitive. The man pulled a folded notice from his breast pocket and handed it down. You seen this one? Calder took the paper, already knowing what it would show. Crude sketch of a young Apache girl. Sharp eyes, long hair. The words, wanted for murder and escape. Dangerous. Reward $50 rare. Calder looked up slowly. Can't say I have. You sure? The soldier asked, leaning forward. Small quiet might be, hurt might be hiding. We think she was rescued or taken by someone passing near the Cottonwood Flats. Calder held the paper a second longer, then folded it and handed it back. Ain't seen nobody but jackrabbits and a cow that don't. Listen. Lieutenant Graham narrowed his eyes. She's not just a runaway, Mr. Wyatt. She's part of a violent group. Savages. That sign they left, they mean it. Calder's jaw tightened. If I see anything, I'll send word. The soldier studied him for a moment longer. Then he nodded once and turned his horse. See, you do. Holder watched him right off until the dust disappeared. Inside, Lena stood just beyond the curtain. She had heard every word. She stared at him, unmoving. He stepped in, took off his hat, and leaned it against the door. They came looking, showed me a paper, said you were wanted. She did not speak. I told them no. Her eyes narrowed. Confused, suspicious. I don't know what you did, Lena, and maybe someday you'll tell me, but out here, a man makes choices. I made mine. He turned to the stove, pretending to stir the beans he had already made. Behind him she moved. Barely a shift, a small breath. And in that moment, trust cracked the silence, just a little wider. The afternoon sun hung low, casting long shadows across the yard as the wind softened for a while. It had been a strange day, too. Quiet like the desert was holding its breath. Calder sat on the porch, sharpening his knife with slow, rhythmic strokes. Each pass of steel on stone echoed faintly through the open yard. He focused on the motion more than the blade, as if the repetition might keep his thoughts from drifting too far toward the woman sleeping inside, or not sleeping. He paused, cocking his head. The faint crunch of footsteps on gravel reached his ears. Not a coyote, not a horse, something light or human. He looked up. Lena was outside. It was the first time she had stepped beyond the threshold on her own since he brought her home. Her bare feet touched the earth tentatively, like she was testing if it would still hold her. The woven blanket he had left folded at the edge of her cot hung from her shoulders, trailing like a second skin. She walked slowly, her steps uneven but certain, toward the far end of the yard where the barn stood watch. Calder set the knife aside, not moving at first. He watched her, not wanting to shatter the moment. Fragile, and yet something in the way she moved had changed. She was not escaping. She was reclaiming. She reached the bare patch of dirt near the barn, a place where the wind had swept clean all debris. There she knelt, carefully as if kneeling before something sacred, and let the blanket fall to her elbows. Her fingers moved with purpose as she picked up a stick and began to draw in the dust. Only then did Calder rise. He walked over slowly, boots quiet on the dirt, giving her space. He stood a few feet behind her, watching her hand trace lines into the earth. In the dirt she had drawn bird. Wings stretched wide mid-flight, but flames encircled it like a burning crown. The lines were bold and sharp, etched with tension. The bird looked alive and in agony, its wings angled upward as though trying to escape the fire or rise with it. Calder had seen war-scene symbols carved into rifles and burned into skin, but this was something older, a cry of prayer. He squatted beside her, his voice low and respectful. What's that? Lena did not look up. Her face remained still, eyes focused on the drawing. For a long moment she said nothing, as if deciding whether or not to let the memory free. Then she spoke. Bird in fire, she said, voice dry and cracked like the riverbeds. In midsummer, my people's sign, Calder, remained silent, his eyes never leaving the image. She tapped the center of the bird with the stick. This was Mum. Father's our family. We painted it on. Tents carved it on boughs always. Flying always fire. Elder could feel the tension in her body, the way her shoulders pulled back, the tightness in her jaw. She was bracing for something. They come soldiers, white coats. Last spring, she continued haltingly. Say we must move far dry place. No food. Water. Say we're danger. She paused. The stick in her hand trembled. We say, no, we stay. We fight. Her voice thinned. They burn. Kill my mother. My 2 brothers burn the old ones inside. The tent. Calder clenched his fists, slowly, jaw tight. Something old and angry stirred in his chest. I run hide. They find me. Beat tie me. Call me. Thieves say I took rifle. I didn't. Then she turned, locking eyes with him for the first time. There was fury in her voice now. I did not steal. I did not kill. I did nothing wrong. Her voice echoed in the open air like thunder. across dry land. Calder did not speak for a moment. Then his voice came low, but certain. I believe you. She turned back to the dirt, dropped the stick. Her hands fell into her lap. Then her shoulders began to shake. At first, she made no sound, just silent tremors. But then the sobs came raw and unfiltered. She curled forward, arms wrapped around, her knees' hair falling like a curtain. The pain was too big for her body, and it poured out in waves. Calder stayed beside her, unmoved. He did not reach for her, did not try to comfort with empty words. Instead, he reached out and pressed his hand into the dirt beside the flaming bird palm. Down fingers spread his skin against the dust she had shaped with grief. It was not touch, it was testimony. She felt it. Eventually, her breathing slowed. She lifted her head, her face strewn with dirt and tears. Their eyes met, unshielded. You can call me Lena, she whispered. Calder gave a small nod, voice like gravel and wind. All right, then. Lena it is. They sat together, in silence as the sun slid behind the ridge and the fire burned in the dirt, faded into shadow, but its ashes like the truth remained. That night, the wind whistled low through the rafters, whispering through the thin walls like a ghost remembering its name. Calder sat by the fire, boots off shirt sleeves, rolled tending a kettle of beans. Lena stood by the window, arms folded around herself, watching the night settle over the desert. The silence between them no longer felt like a wall. It was something gentler now, like shared breath. She turned suddenly. You want to know the truth? Calder looked up, his spoon pausing mid-stir. He nodded, once careful not to press her with words. She walked slowly to the table, sat across from him. Her voice was quiet, but clear. My father was a minor chief, she began. Our band small, peaceful. We traded with settlers, even learned their God. We had rules, boundaries. We wanted to live. Calder listened, his face, unreadable but focused. Full winter ago, she continued, a white woman was found dead near our hunting ground, throat cut. Her husband said it was us. Her fingers tensed around the table's edge, but it was not. She died because he killed her. Everyone knew, but they blamed us. Her eyes found Sirs. The soldiers came, not just them, ranchers, too, townmen with rifles in fear. They said they were taking justice. She swallowed hard, the pain rising in her throat. They burned our camp, shot my brothers while they slept. My mother died holding the prayer beads the priest gave her. They left my father hanging from our council pole, called her, lowered his eyes. They found me in a hollow tree. I was hiding. I had a knife, but they took it, said I was planning revenge, said I was dangerous. They tied me, questioned me, beat me. Then they took me to that tree you found me on, hung me up like bait. For who? Called her, asked, his voice a low scrape. For the rest of us, for anyone, still alive and angry. She stared at him, then asked softly, why did you cut me down? He looked at her for a long moment, the fire crackling between them. Because once, he said, I her brow furrowed. My family called her, said voice flat. Last spring raiders hit our ranch. Apache, they said, maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. I was out hunting, came back to ashes. My sister was 16. I heard her crying in the barn, but I was scared. Didn't go in. I waited for help. She died before anyone came. The silence after that was different. Not empty, heavy. You saved me because you couldn't save her, Lena whispered. He nodded. She studied him. If I had been white, would you still have pulled the knife? Calder stood slowly, walked around the table until he was in front of her. She looked up, searching his face. He reached down, cupped her chin gently in one hand. His fingers were calloused, but his touch was careful, measured. I don't love skin, he said. I love what breathes under it. Her eyes welled, but no tears fell. She reached for his hand, pressed her cheek into his palm, and then, as if by instinct, they leaned into each other. The kiss was quiet, hesitant at first, then fuller, as if both had been holding their breath for too long, and finally remembered how to exhale. Her hands trembled on his chest, his arms circled her back. The fire popped softly behind them. Later, they stood in the small kitchen, candlelight flickering against old wooden beams. Their shadows moved as, one on the far wall, a slow dance neither of them had ever learned, but somehow knew. Outside, the desert wind calmed for the first time in days. Inside, something began to mend. The wind returned with the morning gusting, harder than usual, carrying the scent of sand and distant smoke. Calder felt it. In his bones, something shifting. He had lived long enough under the sky to recognize the weight before a storm, even if it came with boots instead of clouds. 3 days had passed since the kiss, since the words, neither of them, said aloud, took root in the silence. Lena had begun to move more freely around the ranch. She helped feed the animals, swept the floor, even laughed, once softly when Calder cursed the stubborn mule that refused to eat. But the peace was thin. By noon, a trail of dust rose from the east. Calder stood by, the fence jaw-tight rifle resting against the porch. 3 riders approached, local men in canvas coats and old hats, rifles slung across their backs. Their leader wore a tin badge on his chest that looked more self-appointed than earned. With the man called as he dismounted. Heard tell, you might be harboring someone don't belong. Calder kept his voice even. You hear a lot of things, Joe. Don't make them true. Joe Prescott spat into the dirt. A girl. Apache. There's a reward. 50 cash in the thanks of every God-fearing man west of the POS. You come all this way for a rumor. Prescott's eyes narrowed. We aim to check inside just in case. Calder stepped down from the porch slowly. You got a warrant? Prescott snorted. You think this is a court, Wyatt? The other 2 men shifted in their saddles, hands near their weapons. The air hung, brittle. I'm the only one lives here. Calder said, voice calm. Ain't no girl, just ghosts and goats. Prescott stared at him for a long moment, then gave a tight nod. If you're lying, you'll burn with her. They rode off without checking the house, but the message was clear. They would be back with more men and less patience. That night, Calder sat by the fire behind the barn. The stars, hidden behind heavy clouds. In his hand was the crude wooden sign he had pulled from where he buried it, faded now, but still readable, still hateful. White, man don't forgive. He stared at it for a long time, fingers brushing over the letters. Then he stood and carried it to the fire pit. No ceremony, no speech. He laid it down among the kindling and struck a match. The flames rose slowly, then swallowed the words in orange and gold. The wood cracked and curled inward, as if the hate itself resisted dying. Behind him, footsteps. Lena. She wore one of his old coats, too large on her frame. The sleeves rolled twice. She stepped beside him, eyes on the fire, not speaking. But her presence spoke. Enough. The flames danced in her eyes, reflecting something that looked like mourning and something like freedom. I should have burned it sooner. Calder said quietly. She did not answer, but she moved closer, close enough for her shoulder to touch his. She gripped the coat tighter around herself. Her fingers knotted in the fabric. Thank you, she said softly. The words were simple, but they landed like something sacred. He looked down at her, his heart heavy and alive all at once. The fire burned low, embers glowing. Above them the wind slowed to a hush, and for the first time, since he cut her down from that tree, there was no sign left of what had been written against her, only heat smoke, and the weight of what they had chosen. Instead, the next morning brought no wind, just stillness, thick and unnatural. Calder rose early, packed dry, biscuits, jerky, and a canteen of water, into the saddlebag. The air around the ranch felt tighter, more watched. He had seen smoke on the horizon, too steady to be a campfire. Word had spread they were out of time. Lena stood by the pontoon, fence line, hair braided back, wrapped in the same coat she had worn by the fire. Her face was calm, but her eyes held questions. We have to go, Calder said, tying the final strap on his pack. Tonight, she nodded, already knowing. There's land south of here, he continued, past the border. Some say the Apache still live free in the Sierra Madres, far from soldiers, far from signs. He paused. We can make it if we ride hard. Lena stepped closer, so close he could see the soft flush on her cheeks. She reached for his hand and held it firm. He looked down at her, voice barely above a whisper. You'll come with me. She pressed her forehead to his chest, her breath warmed through his shirt. Then she answered in Apache, slow and careful. Muan, Muan. Lavoan closed his eyes. That one sentence carried more weight than 1,000 promises. He kissed the top of her head, breathed in her hair like it was the last thing keeping him grounded. By sundown, they were ready. 2 horses, saddled, the ranch left behind. No note, no fire, no goodbye. Just a quiet door, left swinging and a home turned to memory. They rode through the desert, under cover of stars. Moonlight painting, the ridge of silver. Lena leaned forward. Against her horse, her movement steady, practiced. She did not ask what lay ahead. She only followed. 10 miles from the border, the land opened into low scrub brush and stone cliffs. Calder scanned the horizon constantly. Every shadow a threat, his gut turned tight. Then the shot came. A crack echoed across the plain. Calder jerked in the saddle, then collapsed sideways, sliding hard into the dirt. Calder Lena screamed, leaping from her horse. He clutched his side, blood already soaking through his shirt. "Keep going," he rasped. Another shot whizzed past them, striking the rock behind. From the ridgeline line, two figures appeared, riders' rifles raised. Calder groaned, pulling himself up. "We have to move." Lena hooked her arm under his shoulder, trying to lift him. "Leave me," he growled. "I won't." Through sheer will they stumbled toward the nearby rocks, bullets cutting through the night. Calder's boots dragged behind him, but he forced one step after another. Every breath came wet, his vision blurred. Somehow they reached a narrow gap between two cliffs, a hidden pass. Lena half dragged, half carried him inside, pressed him to the stone, while her own chest heaving. The shots faded behind them. The riders would not follow through the rocks, not without losing speed, not without risk. In the shadow of the pass, Calder collapsed to his knees, blood dripping onto the dust. He looked up at her, pain and wonder, both in his eyes. "You said you wanted to be my wife." She knelt beside him, cupped his face. "I meant it." His lips curved, even through the pain. "Then we better make it through this pass." She nodded. And for the first time since they met, Lena prayed not to the gods of the settlers, but to the spirits of fire, wind, and survival, because love in this place was always a gamble, and tonight they were betting everything. The dawn never came for Calder. Inside the narrow, past the light was faint, bleeding down from the high cliffs in thin silver lines. Lena had done all she could. The sleeve from her dress to bind his side cooled his brow with the last drops of water, but the blood kept coming, and Calder, brave and battered, was slipping beyond reach. He lay against the rock, breath, shallow lips, pale. His eyes fluttered open one last time as she cradled his head in her lap. "Calder," she whispered, voice breaking. His eyes turned to her, slow and distant, like a man waking from a long dream. "You said my name," he murmured, smiling faintly. She nodded, tears streaking her cheeks. "I should have heard it sooner." He said every word, labored. She leaned close, held his face in both hands. "Don't talk, save your strength." He gave a small, hollow laugh. "Too late for saving." "No," she choked. "No, no, no." He reached up with a trembling hand, brushed his fingers along her cheekbone, then her lips. "What's your real name?" he asked, voice no louder than a breeze. She hesitated, then placed his hand over her heart. "Ayana," she said. "My name is Ayana. It means peaceful river." He smiled wider, eyes closing as the pain began to dull. "You brought peace," he whispered, "back to me." A tear fell onto his cheek, and she kissed it away. "I love you," she said, her voice steady now. "I'll carry you with me always." Calder's breath caught once, then faded like a flame in wind. She held him for a long time, rocking him as the desert sun finally crept over the cliffs. Weeks passed. Then months far south, where the border bent into canyons and the maps grew. Vague there stood a small lodge of pine and hide tucked between river stones and mesquite groves. It was simple but strong, a gift from the tribe that had welcomed her, a tribe that still remembered the name of her father. Ayana rose before the sun each day. She tended the fire-dried herbs, helped the elders with medicine. The pain inside her chest had not vanished, but it had quieted, like a deep wound turning to scar. That morning she walked down to the river, the same place she came every sunrise. The water moved slow and wide, brushing against the stones like a mother's hand. Across a child's back, the wind lifted, her braid warm and gentle. She stood, barefoot at the edge, closed her eyes, and let her fingers trace circles in the current. Then, without looking down, she placed one hand softly over her stomach. The curve was small, barely there, but real life growing inside her, quiet and steady. She opened her eyes and looked up at the sky, blue and endless, painted with gold where it kissed the dunes. "Your father," she whispered, "was the only man who forgave and loved." She smiled, though her eyes brimmed. The river kept moving, and so would she. Not alone, not anymore. If this story moved your heart, if it reminded you that even in the harshest deserts, love can bloom like water from stone, then this is the place for you. Subscribe to Wild West. Love stories for more tales of forbidden romance, quiet bravery, and love that defies time, blood, and boundary. From dusty trails to whispered promises, every story is crafted to stay with you long after the last word. Where bullets missed but hearts didn't. Subscribe now and never miss a heartbeat from the Wild West. In 1873, Colorado Territory Sarah Whitmore's own parents sold her like livestock to the highest bidder, convinced that a woman who couldn't bear children had no worth in the unforgiving frontier. But when a widowed father of 5 children saw something in her that even she had forgotten existed, the harsh mountain winds began to carry something neither of them expected: hope. Could a woman society deemed worthless become the very heart of a family that desperately needed her? Sarah's bare feet slammed against the wagon floors. Her father's fist pounded the wooden side. "Get out, girl. Time to meet your new owner." The year 1873 had brought nothing but trouble to the Whitmore family farm in Colorado Territory. And now Sarah knew she was the biggest trouble of all. Her hands shook as she clutched the small cloth bag holding everything she owned in the world. Through the canvas covering, she could hear men's voices talking about her like she was a broken horse they might buy for cheap. "She looks healthy enough," one man said. His boots made heavy sounds on the dirt. "But you say she can't have babies." Sarah's father spat into the dust. 3 years married to Thomas Brennan. Not one child to show for it. Doctor says her insides don't work right, but she can cook clean and read better than most men in these parts. The autumn wind whipped through the gaps in the wagon cover, making Sarah shiver. She pressed her eye to a small hole in the fabric and saw men gathered around like buzzards. Some had mean faces. Others looked at her with hungry eyes that made her stomach twist. But there was one man standing apart from the group, and something about him seemed different. This man was tall, with dark hair and serious eyes. He wore clean clothes, but his hands looked rough from hard work. While the other men laughed and made jokes about buying damaged goods, he stood quiet watching, everything with a frown on his face. "What's her name?" the tall man asked. Sarah's father seemed surprised by the question. Sarah Whitmore. "What's it matter? She'll answer to whatever you call her." "It matters to me," the man said firmly. Sarah felt her heart skip. No one had asked her name in months. Her own husband had called her woman or wife, but never Sarah, especially after the doctor said she couldn't have children. Her parents had started calling her the burden when they thought she wasn't listening. "Can she speak for herself?" the tall man asked. Now, Sarah's father looked annoyed. "Of course she can speak too much if you ask me. Always asking questions, always reading those books. That's probably why she can't do what women are supposed to do." The tall man stepped closer to the wagon. "Miss Sarah, would you come out here, please? Please," he said, "please." Sarah couldn't remember the last time anyone had said please to her. She took a deep breath and pushed through the canvas opening. The sunlight hurt her eyes after the dark wagon. She blinked and saw all the men staring at her. Some looked disappointed, like she wasn't pretty enough. Others nodded like she might be worth the trouble. But the tall man just looked sad. "Miss Sarah," he said gently, "my Samuel McCready. I have 5 children and a farm about 10 miles from here. I need help taking care of my family. Would you be willing to come work for us? Work for them, not be owned. By them, not be their property." Sarah looked at her father, whose face was red with anger. She looked at the other men, who were whispering about the strange way Samuel was treating her. Then she looked back at Samuel McCready and saw something in his eyes she hadn't seen in a very long time. Kindness. "Yes, sir," she whispered. "I'd be willing." Samuel nodded and reached into his pocket. He pulled out more money than Sarah had ever seen and handed it to her father. But instead of walking away, he turned back to Sarah. "Do you have everything you need from the wagon?" Sarah held up her small bag. "This is everything." Samuel's frown got deeper. "That's all your belongings?" Sarah's father spoke up quickly. "She doesn't need much. Never was one for fancy things." But Samuel was looking at Sarah, not her father. "Is there anything else? You'd like to take anything that belongs to you, Sarah?" Sarah thought about her mother's old rocking chair sitting in their cabin. She thought about the small garden she'd planted behind the house, now dying because no one cared for it. She thought about her favorite hiding spot by the creek where she used to read books. No, sir, she said. Nothing else. Belongs to me. Samuel studied her face for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone, including Sarah. He took off his own warm coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. Well, then he said, let's go home. As they walked toward his horse and wagon, Sarah heard her father calling after them. She's your problem now, McCready. Don't come crying to me when she disappoints you. Sarah didn't look back, for they won't. First time in 3 years she was walking towards something instead of being dragged away from it. The coat smelled like pine trees and wood smoke and something she couldn't name but made her feel safe. Mr. McCready, she said, as he helped her into his wagon. Yes, Miss Sarah. Thank you for asking my name. Samuel smiled, and it was the first real smile anyone had given her in longer than she could remember. Everyone deserves to be called by their name, he said as the wagon rolled away from the trading post. Sarah looked up at the big sky above Colorado territory and wondered if maybe, just maybe, her luck was finally changing. Samuel McCready had come to Morrison's trading post that morning looking for winter supplies, not a wife, but standing there listening to Harold Whitmore sell his daughter like the broken tool made his chest burn with anger. The 41-year-old widower hour knew what it felt like to lose everything. 2 years ago, his wife Anna had died, trying to bring their sixth child into the world. The baby died too, leaving Samuel alone with 5 children who needed him to be strong when he felt anything but strong. She's damaged goods, Whitmore was saying to the crowd of men, but she's still got some use left in her. Samuel watched the wagon, where Sarah was hidden, and felt sick. These men were talking about a human being like she was livestock. He'd seen this before during the war when desperate people sold whatever they had just to survive another day. But that didn't make it right. How much you asking? Called out Pete Morrison, who owned the trading post. Pete was known for being mean to his workers and meaner to his wife. 50 and she's yours, Whitmore replied. That's fair for a woman who can work but can't breathe. The words hit Samuel like a punch. He thought about his Anna, who had worked herself to exhaustion trying to care for their children and the farm. She'd been worth more than all the money in Colorado territory, not because she could have babies, but because she was kind and smart and made their house feel like home. I'll pay 60, Samuel heard himself say. Every head turned toward it. Him. Pete Morrison laughed. McCready, you already got more kids than you can handle. What you want with a broken woman? Samuel's hands made fists, but he kept his voice calm. That's my business, not yours. Another man stepped forward. I'll pay 70. I need someone to cook for. My ranch hands. Samuel knew this man, Jake Thompson, and he knew the stories about how Thompson treated the women who worked for him. No woman deserved that kind of life, especially not one who had already been hurt so much. 80, Samuel said firmly. The crowd went quiet. $80 was more money than most men made in 3 months. Harold Whitmore's eyes got big with greed. Now you're talking sense, Whitmore said. $80 it is. But Samuel held up his hand. Not so fast. I want to talk to the lady first. Talk to her. Whitmore laughed. What for? She'll do what she's told. Not in my house, she won't. Samuel said, on the amount of house people get to choose. This caused more whispers among the men. The idea of a woman having choices was strange to most of them, but Samuel remembered his Anna, how she'd always spoken her mind, how she'd made him a better man by challenging him to think harder about right and wrong. When Sarah climbed out of the wagon, Samuel felt his heart break a little. She was thin and pale, like she hadn't been eating enough. Her dress was old and patched, but clean. Her eyes darted around, nervously like a wild animal looking for escape. But when he spoke to her, gently when he asked her permission, instead of giving her orders, something changed in her face. She stood up straighter. Her voice got stronger. And when she said yes to coming with him, Samuel heard something in her tone that surprised him. Hope. The ride back to his farm was quiet at first. Sarah sat as far from him as possible in the wagon, her hands folded tight in her lap. Samuel understood. He was still a stranger to her, and she had no reason to trust any man after what she'd been through. Tell me about your children, Sarah said suddenly. Samuel was surprised she'd spoken first. Well, there's Jacob. He's 17, thinks he's the man of the house since his mother died. Good boy, but he carries too much worry for someone his age. Sarah nodded like she understood about carrying worry. Then there's Mary. She's 13, been trying to take care of everyone since Anna passed. Smart as a whip and twice as determined. The twins Ben and Beth are 10. They're like two sides of the same coin. Where one goes, the other follows. And little Emma Samuel's voice got soft. She's 6 now, barely remembers her mother, but she feels the missing. Anyway, they sound like good children, Sarah said. They are, but they need. Samuel stopped, not sure how to finish. They need a mother, Sarah said quietly. Samuel shook his head. They need someone who cares about them, someone who sees them as more than work to be done or mouths to be fed. Anna used to say that children need to know they matter not just for what they can do, but for who they are. Sarah was quiet for a long time. Finally, she asked, what if I disappoint them? What if I'm not good enough? Samuel looked at her, this woman who'd been thrown away by everyone. Who should have protected her? Miss Sarah, disappointment comes from expecting people to be something they're not. I'm not expecting you to be Anna. I'm not expecting you to be perfect. I'm just hoping you'll care about my children and maybe let them care about you when they reach the farm. Faces pressed against the kitchen window. Samuel could see his children's curiosity and worry. They'd been through so much loss already. Would they be able to open their hearts to this quiet woman with sad eyes? Are you ready, Samuel asked. Sarah took a deep breath and nodded. As they walked toward the house, Samuel found himself hoping that maybe, just maybe, they could all heal each other. After all, the best families weren't always born. Sometimes they were chosen. Emma McCready was stuck 20 feet up in the old oak tree behind the house, and her screams were getting louder by the minute. Sarah dropped her small bundle on the porch and ran toward the commotion without thinking. Below the massive tree, 4 children stood, looking up at their little sister, who clung to a thick branch like a frightened kitten. She went up there, chasing Whiskers, explained Mary, wringing her hands. Now she's too scared to come down. Papa's in the back pasture, fixing fence. Jacob added, his teenage voice cracking with worry. He won't hear us calling from way out there. Sarah studied the tree, remembering her own childhood adventures climbing the apple trees behind her family's house. The bark was rough and strong with plenty of handholds. Before anyone could stop her, she kicked off her worn boots and started climbing. Miss Sarah, what are you doing? Mary gasped. Getting your sister down, Sarah called over her, shoulder already 10 feet off the ground. The children watched in amazement as this strange new woman in their lives scaled the oak tree like she'd been doing it all her life. Sarah's muscles remembered the rhythm of climbing, and soon she was sitting on the branch next to Emma. The little girl's face was streaked with tears and tree sap. I can't get down, she whispered. It's too high. I know it seems scary, Sarah said gently, but I'm going to help you. We'll go down together, one branch at a time. What happened next surprised everyone, including Sarah herself. Emma wrapped her small arms around Sarah's neck and held on tight. For the first time in 3 years, Sarah felt the weight of a child trusting her completely. They climbed down slowly, Sarah guiding Emma's feet to each safe spot. When they finally reached the ground, all 5 children were staring at Sarah with new respect. How did you learn to climb like that? Ben asked, his eyes wide. My papa taught me when I was about your age, Sarah answered, brushing bark from her skirt. He said every girl should know how to rescue herself. Jacob stepped forward, and Sarah noticed he had his father's serious eyes. Thank you for helping. Emma, most ladies would have just screamed for help. I'm not like most ladies, Sarah replied, then wondered if that was something she should admit. Mary smiled for the first time since Sarah had arrived. That's probably a good thing. Most ladies wouldn't last a week out here. As they walked back to the house, Sarah learned more about the McCready children in 10 minutes than she'd expected to discover in days. Mary had been running the household since she was 11. Jacob worked alongside his father every day, but dreamed of becoming a teacher. The twins, Ben and Beth, were opposites. He loved animals and she loved books. And Emma was the baby who kept everyone's hearts both full and terrified. Inside the house, Sarah got her first real look at what would be her new home. The kitchen was large but cluttered with dishes stacked everywhere and clothes hanging from every available hook. The main room had comfortable furniture but needed a woman's touch. Everything was practical, but nothing was pretty. Papa tries his best, Mary said, noticing Sarah's expression, but there's always so much work to do. Sarah rolled up her sleeves. Well, let's see what we can accomplish before he gets back. What followed was unlike anything the McCready children had experienced. Sarah didn't just clean, she organized. She didn't just cook, she taught them songs to sing while they worked. She didn't just mend their clothes, she showed them tricks to make the repairs nearly invisible. But the real magic happened when evening came and Samuel returned from the pasture. He found his house transformed, not just clean, but somehow warmer. The smell of fresh bread filled the air. Candles flickered on the table and his children were gathered around Sarah as she helped Emma practice her letters. Papa, Emma called out, running to him. Miss Sarah climbed the tree to save me, and then we made supper together, and she knows a song about a mockingbird. Samuel looked at Sarah, who was suddenly shy under his gaze. Her hair had come loose from its pins during the tree. Climbing adventure, and there was flour on her apron from the bread-making aching. Sounds like you've had quite a day, he said. It's been wonderful, Sarah replied and meant it. That night, as the family sat down to their first meal, together, something had already changed. Emma insisted on sitting next to Sarah. Mary asked if she could learn the bread recipe. Even Jacob seemed more relaxed, as if having another adult in the house had lifted some invisible weight from his shoulders. But it was the conversation that surprised Sarah most. In her previous life, meals had been silent affairs where children spoke only when spoken to. Here everyone shared stories about their day. Samuel asked each child about their activities and listened to their answers like their words mattered. Miss Sarah, Beth said, during a pause in the chatter, are you going to stay with us for a long time? The question hung in the air like smoke from the fireplace. Sarah looked around, the table at 5 faces waiting for her answer. Some hopeful, some cautious, or interested in her response. I hope so, she said finally, if you'll have me. Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Sarah sat on the front porch watching the stars appear over the Colorado mountains. Samuel joined her, carrying 2 cups of coffee. They've taken to you quickly, he observed. They're good children, Sarah replied. You've raised them well. Samuel was quiet for a moment. It hasn't been easy since Ellen died. Mary's had too much responsibility. Jacob's had to grow up too fast. And the little ones he's trailed off. They need what every child needs, Sarah said. Love, attention. And someone who believes they're important. As they sat in comfortable silence. In silence, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Peace. How is she? Mountains were dark shapes against the starry sky, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to its pack. For the first time since her father had put her in that wagon, Sarah began to believe that maybe, just maybe, she might have found where she belonged. But what she didn't know was that her presence had already been noticed by others in the valley, and not everyone approved of the McCready family's new arrangement. The hammer blow that would shake Sarah's new world arrived in the form of Mrs. Henrietta Caldwell riding up to the McCready house on a gray November morning when the first snow was already dusting the mountain peaks. Mrs. Caldwell was the kind of woman who appointed herself the guardian of everyone else's morals, and she did not approve of what she'd heard about the McCready household. Samuel McCready, she called out before even dismounting from her horse, I need to speak with you about this inappropriate situation you've created. Sarah was hanging laundry on the line behind the house when she heard the sharp voice through the sheets flapping in the cold wind. She could see Mrs. Caldwell's stern face and Samuel's surprised expression as he emerged from the barn. Good morning, Henrietta, Samuel said politely. What brings you out this way? Don't play innocent with me. Mrs. Caldwell snapped. The whole town is talking about the unmarried woman you've got living in your house with those children. It's scandalous. Sarah's hands went still on the clothespins. She'd known this moment would come, but hearing it spoken aloud made her stomach clench with fear. Inside the house, Mary was teaching the younger children their morning lessons. But Sarah could see Jacob's face appear at the kitchen window. At 17, he was old enough to understand exactly what Mrs. Caldwell's visit meant for their family. Miss Sarah is here to help with the household, Samuel replied calmly. Nothing more. Nothing less. Nothing more. Mrs. Caldwell's voice rose. Young woman living under the same roof as a widowed man, sharing meals, sharing daily life. It's improper, Samuel, and you know it. Sarah wanted to disappear. to fade into the gray November sky and spare this good family the trouble her presence had brought them. She started to gather the partially dried clothes from the line, thinking she should pack her few belongings and leave before she caused more problems. But then Emma burst out of the house, her small face bright with excitement. "Miss Sarah, look what I wrote." The 6-year-old ran to her with a slate covered in wobbly letters. Miss Caldwell's sharp eyes focused on the child's obvious affection for Sarah, and her expression grew even more severe. "And what kind of influence is this woman having on your children?" she demanded of Samuel. A good one came. Jacob's voice from the porch. The teenager stepped outside, his jaw set with determination. "Miss Sarah helped Emma with her letters every day. She is teaching Mary how to make medicines from herbs. She climbed a tree to rescue Emma when she was stuck." Jacob Samuel warned quietly, but his son continued, "And she's the first person to make this house feel like a home since Mama died." Mrs. Caldwell's face turned red. "Young man, you have no idea what you're talking about. There are proper ways to run a household, and this isn't one of them. What's proper about 5 children trying to raise themselves?" Mary asked, appearing in the doorway with Beth and Ben behind her. "What's proper about a 17-year-old boy having to be the man of the house? What's proper about a 13-year-old girl doing all the cooking and cleaning?" Sarah watched in amazement as the McCready children, her children, she realized stood up to defend her. But she also saw the real problem. Mrs. Caldwell represented the opinion of the entire community, and communities had power that individual families did not. The point is, Mrs. Caldwell said, regaining control of the conversation, "Decent people don't live this way. Either you marry this woman properly or she needs to find somewhere else to go." The word Mary hung in the cold air like a challenge. Sarah felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. She barely knew Samuel McCready, and he barely knew her. They were 2 broken people trying to help each other survive, not lovers, planning a future together. "That's enough," Samuel said firmly. "How I run my household is my business, Henrietta, not yours, not the town's. It becomes the town's business when it affects the moral character of the community." Mrs. Caldwell shot back, "There are standards, Samuel, rules that decent people follow." "And what about the rule that says we should help each other?" Emma asked, suddenly her small voice cutting through the adult argument. "Miss Sarah helps us every day. Isn't that what church people are supposed to do out of the mouths of babes?" Sarah thought, watching Mrs. Caldwell struggle for an answer, but the woman recovered quickly. "Child, you don't understand adult matters. There are proper ways for unmarried people to behave, and living together isn't one of them." As Mrs. Caldwell prepared to leave, she delivered her final threat. "I'll be speaking to Reverend Matthews about this situation and to the other families in the area. People have a right to know what kind of example is being set for their children." After she rode away, the McCready family stood in the yard like survivors of a storm, uncertain whether it had passed or was just beginning. "Don't listen to her," Mary said fiercely to Sarah. "She's just a mean old woman who doesn't have enough to do with her own life." But Sarah knew it wasn't that simple. Mrs. Caldwell spoke for the respectable people of Cedar Ridge, and their disapproval could make life very difficult for the McCready family. Samuel could lose business, the children could be shunned at school, and the family could find themselves isolated from the community they depended on for survival. That evening, as Sarah prepared supper with unusually quiet children helping her, she made a difficult decision. After the children were in bed, she would talk to Samuel about leaving. It would break her heart to go, but staying might destroy the family she'd come to love. What she didn't know was that Samuel was having the exact same thoughts, and that Jacob had overheard Mrs. Caldwell's threats and was planning something that would change everything. The first snow began falling as darkness settled over the mountains, and with it came the cold reality that winter was approaching, and with winter the McCready family would need each other more than ever. But would the pressure from the outside world tear them apart before they had a chance to see spring together? A massive tree crashed down just 20 feet from the house, missing the roof by inches and trapping the McCready family inside their log home for what would become the longest week of winter. Sarah's heart pounded as she watched Samuel and Jacob rush to check if the fallen pine had damaged their only escape route. Through the frosted windows, she could see snow piling higher than a man's head, with wind howling like a pack of hungry wolves. "We're stuck until this storm passes," Samuel announced, brushing snow from his coat. "Could be days before we can dig our way out." The children gathered around the fireplace, their faces showing worry. They tried to hide. Sarah noticed how Jacob's shoulders tensed with responsibility. How Mary's hands shook slightly as she counted their food supplies, how the twins moved. Closer together for comfort, little Emma climbed into Sarah's lap without asking, seeking the safety that had become as natural as breathing. "Well then, Sarah," said, keeping her voice steady and bright. "Looks like we have time for all those projects we never get to finish." What happened over the next 7 days changed everything between them. Trapped together in the small space, they discovered sides of each other that normal life kept hidden. Sarah learned that Jacob stayed awake during storms, listening for sounds that might threaten his family, so she started sitting with him during the worst hours, sharing stories about her childhood that made him smile for the first time in months. "You really climbed to the top of the church bell tower?" Jacob asked, his 17-year-old seriousness cracking into boyish amazement. "Had to ring the bell when the preacher was sick." Sarah laughed, scared half of the town when they heard it clanging at the wrong time. She discovered that Mary had forgotten how to play, carrying grown-up worries that belonged to someone twice her age. During the second day of their confinement, Sarah started a flower fight while they made bread together. White powder flew everywhere as Mary shrieked with laughter, her careful control dissolving into pure 13-year-old joy. "I haven't laughed like that since Mama died," Mary admitted, later helping Sarah clean flour from the ceiling. Though twins, Ben and Beth, needed adventures, even when trapped indoors. Sarah turned their daily chores into treasure hunts and competitions. They raced to see who could stack firewood fastest, played games where cleaning became battles against invisible dirt monsters, and built blanket forts that served as castles for imaginary kingdoms. "Miss Sarah makes everything fun," Beth whispered to her twin brother, not knowing Sarah could hear. "Even washing dishes feels like playing," Ben agreed. But it was Emma who touched the deepest part of Sarah's heart. The 6-year-old had been carrying a broken doll everywhere, its cloth body torn and stuffing showing through holes that grew bigger each day. On the third day of the storm, Emma finally brought the doll to Sarah with tears in her eyes. "Can you fix her?" Emma asked. "Her insides are falling out, and I don't know how to make her better." Sarah took the doll, carefully seeing how much it meant to the little girl. As she worked with needle and thread, Emma watched every stitch with intense attention. "Mama used to fix things too," Emma said quietly. "But then she got broken and nobody could fix her back." Sarah's hands stopped moving. She looked down at the child in front of her, understanding suddenly why Emma clung so tightly to everyone she loved. "Sometimes broken things can't be fixed the same way they were before," Sarah said gently. "But that doesn't mean they can't be whole again, just different." Emma touched the doll's newly sewn seam. "Different? How well? Your doll was perfect when she was new, but now she has this scar where we fixed her together. That scar shows she was loved enough for someone to take time to make her whole again." The little girl considered this with the seriousness that children bring to important truths. "Are you broken too, Miss Sarah?" The question came without judgment, only curiosity. Sarah looked around at the family she had somehow become part of. The children who had learned to trust her with their fears and hopes. "Maybe little," she admitted. "But I'm learning that broken things can still be useful, still be loved, still be important." Emma nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I'm glad you're broken like us. It means you understand." On the 4th day, when cabin fever threatened to drive everyone crazy, Sarah taught them all to play charades. Samuel joined in acting out animals and occupations with surprising enthusiasm. The sight of their serious father pretending to be a chicken had all 5 children rolling on the floor with laughter. "I haven't seen them this happy since before their mother died," Samuel told Sarah quietly that evening. "They needed permission to be children." "Again," Sarah replied. "Sometimes adults forget that healing happens through joy as much as through work." By the 5th day, they had developed their own rhythm. Morning brought lessons around the kitchen table, with Sarah teaching Emma her letters while Mary helped the twins with arithmetic. Afternoons meant storytelling with each person taking turns creating adventures about brave pioneers and helpful animals. Evenings brought music with Jacob playing his harmonica while they all sang songs that echoed off the log walls. The storm finally broke on the seventh day, but something had changed forever inside that snowbound house. They had become more than just people living under the same roof. They had become a family, knitted together by shared laughter, common struggles, and the kind of trust that only comes from weathering hard times together. When Samuel and Jacob finally dug their way to the barn to check on the animals, they found all the livestock safe and healthy. But the real discovery was what they had found inside themselves during those trapped days. "Miss Sarah," Emma said as they watched the men shovel paths through the snow, "are you going to stay with us forever?" Sarah felt something subtle in her heart, a certainty that surprised her. With its strength, "If your papa and the rest of you want me to, then yes, we want you to," Mary said firmly, speaking for all her siblings. But even as Sarah felt this new belonging take root, she wondered what challenges spring might bring to test these fragile bonds they had built. Sarah was hanging wet sheets on the clothesline when she saw them coming up the mountain path. Two men on horseback, moving with the determined pace of people bringing unwelcome news. Her hands froze on the clothespins as if she recognized the slouched shoulders and angry posture of her father, Harold Whitmore. The man riding beside him sat straighter in his saddle, and when he removed his hat to wipe his brow, Sarah's stomach dropped to her boots. Thomas Brennan, her former husband, had come to Colorado territory. Sarah, her father's voice cut across the spring, mourning like an axe splitting wood. "Time to stop this foolishness and come home, where you belong." The children heard the commotion and came running from their various chores. Jacob appeared first, his hand moving instinctively to the rifle they kept by the door. Mary gathered the younger ones behind her, like a mother hen protecting her chicks. Emma pressed against Sarah's legs, sensing danger even if she didn't understand its source. Thomas Brennan dismounted and straightened his black suit, looking around the McCready homestead with the dismissive gaze of a man who thought he owned everything he saw. His eyes lingered on Sarah with a mixture of possession and disgust that made her skin crawl. "Sarah," he said, his voice carrying the flat authority she remembered too well, "I've come to collect what belongs to me. She doesn't belong to anybody." Jacob spoke up, his 17-year-old voice cracking slightly, but his courage holding firm. Thomas laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Boy, adults are talking. A woman belongs to her husband until death, and since I'm very much alive, this woman comes with me." Samuel emerged from the barn, moving with the careful alertness of a man who sensed trouble. His eyes took in the scene quickly. The two strangers, his children's frightened faces, Sarah's pale complexion. "Gentlemen," Samuel said, his voice polite but caring, warning underneath. "You're on my property. State your business." Harold Whitmore puffed up like an angry rooster. "I'm Harold Whitmore, this woman's father. This here is Thomas Brennan, her rightful husband. We've come to take her back where she belongs. The lady isn't property to be taken." Samuel replied, his hand resting casually near his belt where Sarah knew he kept a knife. "She's part of this family now." Thomas pulled folded papers from his coat pocket. "I have legal documents, marriage certificate signed and witnessed in Kansas. She's still my wife in the eyes of God and the law." Emma began to cry, understanding finally that these men wanted to take away the woman who had become her mother in all but name. Mary put protective arms around her little sister while the twins moved closer to Jacob. Sarah ran away from her duties, Harold announced, left her husband's house without permission. "But Thomas here is willing to take her back despite her shortcomings." "What shortcomings?" Samuel asked, his voice growing dangerously quiet. "She's barren," Thomas said bluntly, as if discussing a broken tool. "Can't give a man children, but I've learned that having someone to cook and clean is better than having no wife at all." The insult hit Sarah like a physical blow, bringing back all the shame and self-doubt she thought she had left behind. For a moment, she felt herself shrinking back into the worthless woman these men insisted she was. But then Emma's small hand slipped into hers, and Mary moved to stand beside her, and Jacob stepped forward with fierce protectiveness. Even 10-year-old Ben and Beth positioned themselves like tiny soldiers ready to defend their family. "You're wrong," Emma said in her clear 6-year-old voice. Miss Sarah isn't broken. She takes care of us better than anybody. She's not Miss Sarah anymore, Mary added with teen-year-old dignity. She's our mama now, and we don't want her to go anywhere. Thomas's face darkened with anger. Children should be seen and not heard. Sarah, get your things. We're leaving today. But something had changed, and Sarah, during her months with the McCready family, the woman who had once submitted to every harsh word and cruel judgment, now felt strength flowing through her like mountain water. No, she said simply. The word hung in the spring air like a thunderclap. No. Harold's voice rose to a shout. You don't get to say no to your father and your husband. I'm not saying no to my husband, Sarah replied, her voice growing stronger with each word. I'm saying no to a man who threw me away like garbage and only wants me back because his second choice didn't work out either. She turned to face Thomas, directly meeting his eyes without flinching. You divorced me, remember? Told the whole town I was useless because I couldn't give you sons. Well, I found out something while I've been gone. I can be a mother to children who need one. I can build a family through love instead of biology. That's not how marriage works, Thomas snarled. You belong to me until I say otherwise. She belongs to herself, Samuel said firmly. And if she chooses to stay here, that's exactly what she'll do. The confrontation was building towards something that would change everything. But Sarah could see in Thomas's eyes that he wasn't finished fighting for what he believed he owned. The spring wind picked up, rustling through the new leaves and carrying the scent of growing things. Change was coming to the McCready homestead, whether they were ready for it or not. Sarah's hands shook as she poured coffee into 4 cups. The kitchen felt smaller than a jail cell, with Thomas and her father sitting at one side of the wooden table while Samuel stood by the window like a guard. Outside, the children pressed their faces against the glass, trying to understand why their safe world suddenly felt dangerous. I've come to take back what belongs to me, Thomas announced, pulling papers from his coat pocket. His voice sounded like rocks grinding. Together, this here marriage contract says Sarah is still my wife. The law backs me up. Samuel's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice calm. The law also says people can't be owned like horses or cattle. Sarah gets to choose her own path. Her father shifted in his chair, looking uncomfortable for the first time since he'd arrived. Now, Sarah, don't be foolish. Thomas is offering you a real marriage again. Most men wouldn't take back a woman who can't give them babies. The word babies hit Sarah like a slap. For 3 years, everyone had made her feel broken because her body wouldn't do what everyone expected. But as she looked around the kitchen where she'd cooked thousands of meals, helped with homework, and bandaged scraped knees, something powerful stirred inside her chest. Tell me something, Thomas, Sarah said, her voice growing stronger with each word. In our 3 years together, did I keep your house clean? Thomas frowned. Well, yes, but did I cook your meals every day? Did I wash your clothes and mend them when they tore? Of course you did, but that's not the point. Did I sit by your bed? When you had fever, did I help your business by being kind to customers? Did I ever lie to you or cheat on you? Thomas's face turned red. A woman's main job is to be a person. Sarah's voice cracked like thunder. The children outside jumped at the sound. I am a person, not just a baby-making machine. That broke down. She turned to face her father, seeing him with clear eyes for the first time in her life. You sold me because you couldn't see anything good about me except what I couldn't do. But Samuel sees who I really am. Samuel stepped forward, his presence filling the room with quiet strength. Sarah has raised my children for almost a year. She's taught them to read better, help them with their fears, made this house into a real home. She matters to us. But she can't give you sons, Thomas shouted, slamming his fist on the table. Little Emma burst through the kitchen door, her face wet with tears. Don't take Miss Sarah away, she cried, running to wrap her arms around Sarah's waist. She fixes everything that's broken. She reads us stories. She makes the best apple pie in the whole world. Mary followed Emma inside, her young face fierce with protection. Sarah helps me with the hard parts of taking care of everyone. Before she came, I had to do everything by myself. Now I get to be a kid sometimes. Jacob appeared in the doorway, his 17-year-old frame blocking the entrance. If you try to take Sarah against her, you'll have to fight every man in this valley. We all know what real family looks like, and it's not about forcing people to go where they don't want to be. The twins, Ben and Beth, squeezed past their older brother. Sarah teaches us arithmetic, Ben said proudly. And she helps us catch fireflies, Beth added. Mama used to do that before she went to heaven. Thomas looked around the room at the united family facing him. His confident expression began to crack. This isn't right. A man should have his wife back. A man should treat his wife like, maybe, treasure, not like property. Samuel replied. His voice carried the kind of authority that came from earning respect instead of demanding it. You threw Sarah away once. You don't get to pick her up again just because your next choice didn't work out. Sarah felt something shift inside her chest like a door opening after being locked for years. She looked at Thomas, the man who had made her feel worthless, then at her father who had sold her like a broken tool. Finally, she looked at Samuel and his children who had shown her what love really meant. I'm not going anywhere, she said, her voice steady. And sure, this is my family now. These children need me and I need them. Thomas, you can keep your papers. Choose to stay where I'm wanted for who I am, not what I might give someone. Silence that followed felt like the moment before dawn breaks. Thomas's face went through several expressions before settling on angry defeat. Her father looked confused, as if seeing his daughter as a real person for the first time. This isn't over, Thomas muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. Samuel moved to stand beside Sarah, his presence solid as mountain stone. Yes, it is. And if you come back here, bothering my family, you'll answer to me. And every decent man in Colorado territory. As Thomas and her father prepared to leave, Sarah felt Emma's small hand slip into hers. The little girl looked up with trust shining in her eyes. You're staying forever, right? Miss Sarah, forever and always sweet. Girl, Sarah promised, meaning every word. Through the window she watched her pass right away down the mountain trail, carrying with it all the years of feeling broken and worthless. What remained was a kitchen full of people who loved her exactly as she was. The bells of Cedar Ridge Community Church rang out across the valley Sunday morning, calling people to make the hardest decision some of them had ever faced. Word had spread through the small town faster than wildfire. Confrontation at the McCready place, Sarah's choice to stay, and Thomas Brennan's angry departure. Now everyone had to decide what they really believed about family love and second chances. Sarah sat in the wagon beside Samuel, her heart beating like a drum against her ribs. She hadn't been to church since arriving in Colorado, too ashamed of her situation to face the judgment of proper folks. But today felt different. Today she was choosing to stand up and be counted. Whatever the cost, Al said quietly as they approached the church. We could drive right past and head up to the lake for a picnic. Emma bounced on the wagon seat between them. But I want everyone to see that Miss Oil, Sarah is really part of our family now. She's right, Papa, Mary added from the back of the wagon. We shouldn't have to hide who we are because some people might not like it. The church steps buzzed with conversation that stopped dead when the McCready wagon pulled up. Sarah felt dozens of eyes watching as Samuel helped her down, his hand steady and sure in hers. The children formed a protective circle around her, their loyalty visible to everyone present. Inside the church, whispers followed them down the center aisle like bees, buzzing around honey. The McCready family filled an entire pew with Sarah, positioned between Mary and Emma. She could feel the weight of judgment from some directions and support from others, as if the congregation itself was split down the middle. Reverend Matthews stepped up to his pulpit, his kind eyes scanning the faces before him. He was a smart man who understood that his sermon today would shape how this community treated the McCready family for years to come. Today I want to talk about Ruth. He began, his voice carrying clearly through the wooden building. Ruth was a woman who had to choose between the safe path and the right path. She could have gone back to her birth family where everything was familiar and expected. Instead, she chose to stay with Naomi or her mother-in-law, saying, where you go, I will go. Your people will be my people. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes as the Reverend continued. Ruth built her family through choice, not just through blood. She became an ancestor of King David and Jesus, himself proving that God can work through any family built on love and commitment. After the service, Sarah stood outside the church with Samuel and the children, unsure what kind of reception they would receive. Some folks hurried past with quick nods, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. Others stopped to chat about the weather and crops, treating them exactly as they always had. Then Margaret Patterson approached. She was the wife of the mill owner and the closest thing Cedar Ridge had to a social leader. What she did next would influence how the entire community responded. Miss Sarah, Mrs. Patterson said formally, then surprised everyone by reaching for Sarah's hands. I've been watching your family all winter and spring. I've seen how those McCreated children have thrived under your care. Behind her, a group of women gathered: the school teacher, the doctor's wife, the widow who ran the general store, and several farm wives. They had made a decision together, and their united front would speak louder than any individual opinion. We've talked among ourselves, Miss Patterson continued, and we want you to know that you are welcome in our community. We've seen what real mothering looks like, and it has nothing to do with giving birth. It has everything to do with giving love. Mrs. Henderson, the school teacher, stepped forward. Mary's reading has improved tremendously since you started helping her at home. And Jacob's learned more about responsibility in 1 year than some boys learn in 5. Emma talks about you constantly, added Dr. Morrison's wife. She lights up whenever she mentions Miss Sarah. That's not something you can fake. The blacksmith's widow nodded. I've watched you at the store, always patient with all 5 children, making sure each one feels special. That takes a gift not every woman has. Sarah felt overwhelming gratitude wash over her. These women had been watching, judging, and deciding. Their verdict was acceptance spoken publicly for the whole town to hear. Young Dr. Morrison himself approached the group. Mr. McCready, I hope you don't mind me saying, but your family has been the picture of health and happiness this past year. Whatever arrangement you have is clearly working well for everyone involved. Samuel's smile was broad and genuine. Thank you, Doctor. We've been blessed to find each other. Across the churchyard, Sarah noticed a small group of men talking in low, serious voices. Among them stood Thomas Brennan and her father, their faces dark with anger at the community's obvious support for the McCready family. Thomas caught her eye and made a gesture. That might have been threatening, but it looked petty and powerless compared to the circle of support surrounding her. Emma tugged on Sarah's dress. Miss Sarah, does this mean everyone likes us? Now Sarah knelt down to meet the little girl's eyes. It means the people who matter have good hearts. Sweet girl, and the ones who don't matter can think whatever they please. As the crowd began to disperse, families heading home for Sunday dinner, Sarah felt a lightness in her chest that she hadn't experienced in years. The community had spoken, and they had chosen love over law, compassion over convention. Ready to go home? Samuel asked, offering his arm. Yes, Sarah replied, the word carrying more meaning than any vow she had ever spoken. I'm ready to go home. The wagon ride back to the homestead was filled with chatter and laughter. The children excited by the morning's events. Sarah watched the familiar landscape roll past the mountains that had sheltered her transformation, the valley that had become her sanctuary, the road that led to the only real home she had ever known. Behind them, the church bells continued to ring, carrying the sound of acceptance across the entire valley. A scream cut through the morning silence like a knife through butter, sending every bird in the valley flying toward the mountains. Sarah dropped the basket of eggs she'd been carrying from the chicken coop and ran toward the sound, her heart beating so fast it felt like thunder in her chest. Emma lay crumpled at the bottom of the ladder leading to the hoft. Her small body twisted in a way that made Sarah's stomach turn cold. The 6-year-old's face was white as fresh snow, and a dark pool of blood spread slowly beneath her golden hair. Get your father, Sarah shouted to Jacob, who stood frozen in the barn doorway like a statue made of fear. Now Sarah knelt beside Emma, her hands shaking as she checked for breathing. The little girl's chest moved up and down, but her eyes stayed closed. Blood trickled from a cut on her forehead, and her left arm bent at a strange angle that meant broken bones. Samuel burst into the barn, his work boots sliding on the hay-covered floor. Behind him came Mary, the twins, and Jacob, their faces painted with the kind of terror that comes when your world might be falling apart. How bad? Samuel asked, his voice steady, though his hands trembled as he touched Emma's face. She's breathing, but her arm is broken, Sarah said, tearing strips from her apron to wrap around Emma's head wound. We need Dr. Harrison. Fast doc in Denver for the week, Samuel said, and Sarah saw something break behind his eyes. Won't be back until next Tuesday. The nearest town with another doctor was 3 days' ride through mountain passes that winter had made dangerous. Emma couldn't wait that long. Sarah looked at the little girl's pale face, and made a decision that scared her more than anything she'd ever done. I can set the bone, she said quietly. My mother taught me when I was Mary's age. We live too far from town to wait for doctors. Samuel stared at her. Sarah, if you make a mistake, if we do nothing, she might never use that arm again, Sarah replied, meeting his eyes, or worse. Mary stepped forward, her young face serious. I'll help. Tell me what to do. The next hour felt like the longest day of Sarah's life. She sent Ben to boil water and gather clean cloth. Beth held Emma's legs still while Mary supported her shoulders. Jacob rode to fetch Mrs. Patterson, who had helped with births and broken bones before. Sarah's hands moved with a skill she'd forgotten she possessed. Feeling along Emma's arm for the break. The bone had snapped clean, about halfway between elbow and wrist, but it hadn't pushed through the skin. That was good news. Hold her tight, Sarah warned Mary and Beth. Then she pulled the bone ends back into place. Emma's scream brought tears to everyone's eyes, but the arm looked straight again. Sarah wrapped it with splints made from barnwood and strips of cloth the way her mother had shown her. Years ago on their Kansas farm, Mrs. Patterson arrived as Sarah finished the bandaging, took one look at the work, and nodded with approval. Clean job, she said. That arm should heal up fine if we keep it still. Emma woke up that evening asking for water and wondering why. Everyone looked so worried. She tried to sit up and winced when her arm wouldn't move right. What happened to me? She asked, her voice small and confused. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, smoothing Emma's hair away from the bandage on her forehead. You fell from the hoof, sweet one, but you're going to be just fine. Did you fix me like you fixed my doll? Sarah's throat felt tight. Yes, baby, just like your doll. Emma studied Sarah's face with a serious look. Children get when they're thinking hard about something important. Mama. Sarah. Yes, I'm glad you know how to fix broken things. That night after Emma had fallen asleep, holding Sarah's hand, Samuel found Sarah sitting on the front porch staring up at the stars. Her whole body shook like leaves in a strong wind. The fear she'd hidden all day finally showing itself. She could have died, Sarah whispered. What if I'd made her arm worse? What if the bone doesn't heal right? What if Samuel sat beside her close enough that she could feel the warmth from his body? But she didn't die and her arm will heal. You saved her, Sarah. You were exactly what this family needed when we needed it most. Sarah leaned against his shoulder, feeling the solid strength that had anchored this family through so many storms. I was so scared. I've never been that scared in my whole life. That's what makes you brave, Samuel said softly, being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. The next morning, Emma sat at the kitchen table with her arm in a sling, bossing Mary around about how to make pancakes properly. The accident had shaken everyone, but it had also shown them something important about the woman who had become the heart of their home. Sarah Whitmore had arrived at their door as someone the world had thrown away. But when crisis struck, she had proven herself to be exactly the kind of person you wanted standing beside you when everything went wrong. She wasn't just someone who cooked their meals and mended their clothes. She was someone who could think fast, act brave, and fight for their family when fighting was needed. As Sarah watched Emma giggle at Ben's silly faces across the breakfast table, she realized something had changed inside her too. For the first time since leaving her father's house, she felt like more than just a useful addition to someone else's life. She felt like a protector, a healer, person whose presence made the difference between safety and danger for people who mattered to her. The woman who had once believed herself broken had just proven she could fix what was most precious to her new family, and that knowledge settled into her bones like strength she'd never known she possessed. 6 months later, on a morning when spring painted the Colorado mountains green with new hope, Sarah stood in her garden watching something she'd never expected to see. Emma ran between the vegetable rows with both arms working perfectly, chasing butterflies and laughing like music carried on the mountain breeze. The arm had healed straight and strong, just as Mrs. Patterson had predicted. But something else had healed too. Something in Sarah herself that she was only now beginning to understand. Mama, Sarah, Emma called, holding up a handful of wildflowers. Look what I picked for you. The word mama still sent warm shivers through Sarah's heart every time she heard it, not because she had given birth to this child, but because she had chosen to love her completely, and Emma had chosen to love her back the same way. Samuel appeared at the garden gate, his face wearing the kind of smile that meant good news. In his hand, he held an official-looking letter with fancy writing on the outside. "What's that?" Sarah asked, wiping dirt from her hands on her apron. "Letter from the territorial government," Samuel said, his voice carrying excitement he was trying to keep under control. "About our land claim." Sarah's stomach jumped. They had been waiting months to hear whether their homestead application would be approved. Without official ownership of the land, everything they had built could disappear as quickly as morning frost. Samuel opened the letter with careful fingers, his eyes moving across the words while Sarah held her breath. The other children gathered around, sensing that something important was happening. "Well," Mary asked, her voice tight with worry. Samuel looked up, his face breaking into the biggest smile Sarah had ever seen. "We got it. All 160 acres. The land is officially ours." The Shaiza celebration that erupted in the garden was like nothing Sarah had ever experienced. The children whooped and danced. Emma threw her flowers in the air like confetti, and Samuel swept Sarah off her feet and spun her around until they were both dizzy with joy. But as the excitement settled, Sarah realized this moment meant more than land ownership. It meant permanent belonging. It meant no one could ever force her to leave this place where she had discovered her worth. That evening, as the family gathered for supper around their kitchen table, Samuel stood up in the way that meant he had something important to say. "I've been thinking about what this land ownership means for our family," and he began, looking at each of his children and then at Sarah. "It means we can make plans for the future, real plans." He turned to Jacob, who had grown taller and stronger over the winter. "Jacob, I want you to think about what you want to do with your life. Stay and work the land with me, or go to Denver for more schooling. Either choice is fine by me." Jacob's face lit up. "Really, P, I could go to the city. If that's what you want, we'll find a way to make it happen." Samuel looked at Mary. "Next, Mary, you've been managing this household like a grown woman, but you deserve the chance to be young too. Maybe learn music or painting, whatever interests you." Mary blushed but looked pleased. "I'd like that, Papa. Ben and Beth, you two are smart enough to be anything you want when you grow up. We'll make sure you get the education to choose your own paths." Then Samuel's eyes found Sarah's across the table. "And Sarah, my dear wife, I want you to know that you've given all of us something we never expected to have again." "What's that?" Sarah asked softly. "Hope for the future. Belief that tomorrow can be better than today. You showed us that broken things can become beautiful, that families can be built from love instead of just blood, and that worth comes from what you give, not what you can produce." Emma tugged on Sarah's sleeve. "Mama Sarah, are we going to live here forever and ever?" Sarah looked around the table at the faces that had become more precious to her than anything she had ever imagined wanting. These children who called her mama not because she had given them life, but because she had chosen to share her life with them. This man who had seen value in her when the rest of the world saw only failure. "Yes, sweet one," Sarah said, her voice strong with certainty. "We're going to live here forever and ever." Later that night, after the children were asleep, Sarah and Samuel sat on their front porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky. The mountains rose around them like protective walls, and the sound of the creek running past their property sang like a lullaby. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if your father hadn't brought you to that trading post?" Samuel asked. Sarah considered the question. "I used to, but now I think everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. All the pain, all the rejection, all the believing I was worthless. It all led me here to this family, to this life. Do you think you'll ever want to contact your father, let him know how things turned out?" Sarah shook her head. "He made his choice about my worth. I don't need his approval anymore to know what I'm worth." Samuel reached for her hand, his callous fingers intertwining with hers. "And what are you worth, Sarah?" "McCready." Sarah smiled, thinking of Emma's healed arm, of Jacob's college. Dreams of Mary's music lessons, of the twins' bright futures, of the garden that flourished under her care of the home, that ran smoothly because of her attention, of the man beside her who had chosen to see her strength instead of her limitations. "I'm worth exactly what I choose to give," she said, "and I choose to give everything I have to this family, this land, this life we've built. Together, the Colorado wind that had once carried the dust of her abandonment now carried the scent of her garden, the laughter of her children, the promise of countless tomorrows filled with the kind of love that transforms everything it touches. Sarah Whitmore McCready had learned the most important lesson of all that worth isn't something others give you or take away from you. It's something you create every day through the choices you make,
The
the
last
love
light
you
of day
offer, and the
leaned
courage
low
you
over
show when
the prairie,
life asks
gilding
you
the
to be
hills
more
in
than
a
you
hush
ever
of
thought
gold and
possible.
shadow.
As shooting
Boaz
stars
Mercer rode,
began to
slow
streak
reins
across the
loose as
mountain
if the horse
sky,
could
Sarah
sense he
squeezed
wasn't in a
Samuel's
hurry to
hand
dig
and
what
smiled at
waited
the
for him.
beautiful life that had
The shovel
grown
lashed
from the
to the
ashes of her
saddle,
broken
creaked with
dreams.
every step, a wooden reminder of the errand no one else wanted. A grave needed digging out past Pine Hollow, and the sheriff had asked Boaz because Boaz never asked questions and the ground didn't mind him. Wind dragged over the wheatgrass like a woman dragging her skirts across a floor. Boaz pulled his coat tighter, though it wasn't cold, just lonely-like. Most evenings since the war and the widowhood and the long quiet that came after. The town had only set a bride when they sent him out, struck dead, running from her wedding someone, muttered at the saloon. Another added, best not to ask who she was running from, but no one followed up. Dead was dead, and Boaz was used to burying things that never got claimed. He passed the dry creek bed and the twisted cotton wood where two lovers had hanged themselves last winter. Vultures circled, overhead black letters spelling something cruel across the sky. The air stank faintly of blood and lilacs. He dismounted where the earth had already been disturbed. Some attempt at a burial hasty, shallow as if guilt had done the digging and couldn't finish. Boy knelt. The soil was loamy, darker than it should have been. There were shoe prints in the mud, two sets, one man's boots, one woman's bare feet. The spade slid into the soil with barely a whisper, and he began to work. 3 minutes, and the earth moved. He stopped. At first he thought it was a trick of breath, the way dry ground sinks in places after rain, but then there it was. Again, a hand broke through the dirt, small pill fingers clawing upward like they were trying to escape a nightmare that followed underground. Boaz dropped to his knees, bare hands shoving earth away. Her wrist was blue, scraped raw. Her mouth surfaced, next open, gasping. Eyes shut, lashes caked with dirt. She coughed, choked, and then, miracle of God, she whispered, don't let him see. Me. You didn't ask who. Boaz wrapped her in the canvas tarp from his saddle. Bag carried her like a child who'd seen the devil. She trembled the whole way, back half-conscious, muttering things. That made no sense, names he didn't recognize, dates that hadn't come yet. Blood soaked through the hem of her dress, but she clutched his coat like it was a lifeline. His horse picked a cautious pace through the juniper brush as dusk collapsed into night. Thunder muttered somewhere far off, low, dismissive. No stars dared to show. By the time they reached his cabin in the hills, her breathing had steadied to something shallow but even. Boaz built the fire, first letting the warmth crawl into the one-room space before he laid her on his cot. She barely stirred, her hair matted with soil and pine needles, spilled over the pillow like riverweed. Her hands were baldled into fists even, in sleep. He set a basin to boil, added willow bark and chamomile, the only medicine he knew that didn't come from a bottle or bullet. When she finally opened her eyes, they were storm gray and unfocused. Where am I? She rasped, voice splintered. You're safe, Boaz said. She tried to sit up, failed. Her eyes scanned the cabin, lingered on the rifle hanging above the hearth. Is he here? No, pause. I don't know where I am. You don't have to, he said. You're not in the ground, that's all that matters. She blinked. One tear, just one cut a path through the dirt on her cheek. You were going to bury me. I was sent to another pause. Her gaze sharpened slightly, but you stopped. The earth moved. Silence thickened between them. The fire hissed softly in the hearth, and outside the wind twisted through the pines like a morning song. She turned her face to the wall as if sleep might take her back to wherever she came from. But Boaz knew sleep didn't work that way, not after something like this. He stepped outside and washed his hands in the rain barrel, watching the water darken with soil and something that looked like regret. He remembered when the undertaker in town had handed him a pine box for his wife and told him to make it quick. Earth's hungry this time of year. He dug that grave slow. He wondered now if someone had dug this one fast. Inside, she stirred again. Her voice was clearer this time. What day is it, Friday? Morning. Near midnight. Another silence. Then I'm not too late. For what? She didn't answer. She slept fitfully, speaking in whispers, shivering even, though the fire was full. Once she called out soft, desperate. But the what? Name she used wasn't his. He didn't take it personal. He wasn't there to be loved, just to be a shelter for now. When the storm broke around 3, lightning flared behind the mountains and lit up her face. In that second, Boa saw how young she was, 30 maybe, or younger if the world had aged her early. There was a scar beneath her eye, half-healed, and something in the way she held herself even unconscious as if bracing for the next blow. He made, T laid out bandages, sharpened his knife not for fear but for form. He was a man who lived by rhythm. Sleep, rise, repair, bury, repeat. This had broken. The rhythm cracked it clean through, and yet he didn't mind the sound. By dawn, her breathing was even. Her skin had color. The fire was low, but still burning. She hadn't died again in the night. He sat near her, but not too close, just enough to hear her speak, if she ever did again. The sky softened through the shutters. He heard her shift, then murmur, I dreamt I was underground again, but this time someone waited. Boa said nothing. Then her voice steady now, almost defiant. He said I was too plain, that I wasn't the girl he was promised. Said I tricked him. Then he hit me. Her hand trembled on the wool blanket, and when I stopped breathing, I think he liked it. Boas stared into the fire. You're breathing now. She nodded. He rose and fetched the tea, held it out without touching her. You got a name, I don't want to tell it. Yet. All right. She sipped once, wincing. Then do I have to go back? Not. If you don't want to. You don't even know what I've done. Don't have to. She looked at him, then really looked for the first time, and something passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but the seed of it. A kind of hush that comes before music. You were digging my grave, she said. I was. Why you... Stop! Boaz's voice was low, worn down by wind and time. Because the dirt moved, and the dirt don't lie. She stared into the cup, whispered, then, maybe I'm still alive. Boaz leaned back, in his chair, eyes on the shutters, glowing with pale dawn. He didn't know her story, but he'd seen enough graves to know most folks got planted too early or too late. Rare was the one who got out before the worms arrived. She was rare. The sun crept over the hill like a secret being told. Boaz rose to stoke the fire again. He had a feeling he wouldn't be digging today, not for a grave anyway. He looked once more at the woman lying in his bed, wrapped in his old cavalry coat, clutching tea like it might hold her together. And he realized something strange. For the first time in years, he hadn't thought about the past all night, just the living. And that was no small miracle. The fire had burned low by morning, leaving only coals and a faint warmth that clung to the corners of the room. Was awake when Boa stepped back inside, standing barefoot on the creaking wooden floor, wrapped in a patchwork quilt that didn't quite reach her ankles. Her eyes were clearer now, but they carried the heavy silence of someone who had run a great distance without ever moving. I didn't die, did I? She asked softly, like testing the weight of her own voice. No, Boas said, setting down the bucket of water he'd hauled from the spring. You didn't. Feels like I did, or maybe I should have. He didn't answer. He'd long stopped offering comfort in words. He handed her a chipped enamel cup, filled with warm tea, and when she didn't take it, he set it on the small table by the bed and turned away. Sometimes mercy was just giving someone space to come back into their own body. She sipped it eventually. The bitterness made her flinch, but she kept drinking. There was something careful about the way she moved now, like a deer that hadn't decided if it was safe to stop running. Her bruises had begun to show, in full, under the daylight. Purple, rising like oil beneath the skin of her throat and temple. She caught him, looking once, and her chin lifted slightly. Not pride exactly, just a refusal to be ashamed of things she hadn't chosen. "Is this your home?" she asked, eyes on the cracked beams overhead. "It is." "You live alone?" "I do." "Why?" Boaz didn't move. He just stared at the stove like it might hold the answer. "Because the last one I love died and I buried her myself. Didn't feel right asking anyone else to touch that." She said nothing, but her posture softened just a fraction, like the knowledge of grief shared quietly was its own kind of shelter. The next 3 days passed in slow inches. She stayed inside, moving between the bed and the chair near the fire. Her voice returned, in full, low, and even like the rustle of pages in an old book. She spoke little, but when she did, Boaz listened. Learned she liked her tea sweet, that she hated thunder, that she still didn't want to say her name. At night, she would wake gasping, gripping the blanket, like it could stop the dark from swallowing her. Boaz never asked what she saw in her dreams. He just lit the lantern-brewed tea and let her sit in silence until the shaking stopped. On the 4th morning, she asked, "Do you believe in sin?" He looked at her for a long time before answering. "I believe folks get broken and some stay that way, but not all." She stared at the fire, said, "I was born wrong. That something in me pulled trouble like rot draws flies." Boaz picked up a log and fed the flames. "You ain't rot." Her laugh was dry, bitter. "You don't know me. I know you didn't deserve the ground they left you in." That shut her up for a while, but it was the kind of silence that burrowed into healing, not hiding. Outside, the world moved on without them. The town talked, of course. Gossip rolled down from the saloon to the church steps like a tumbleweed laced with venom. Folks whispered about the grave left unfilled, about the man who came back from Pine Hollow with someone wrapped in canvas. Not a corpse, but a woman with a bloodied lip and no name. Agnes Cobb was the first to visit. She arrived with a basket of bread and cloth, her eyes sharp as knitting needles beneath her bonnet. "Brought you something to eat," she said, though her real offering was curiosity. Boaz opened the door wide. "She's resting. She'll need a dress soon. That one she's wearing is no better than a funeral shroud. She'll manage." Agnes narrowed her eyes, looked past him into the cabin where the woman sat straight, back near the fire. Her hands folded, like she was waiting for judgment. "She got a name yet? Not one she wants to give." Agnes gave a short nod and handed him the basket. "Well, if she needs something stitched, you send word. Don't listen to talk." Boaz inclined his head and Agnes stepped down the porch, without waiting for thanks. "Butterby," left the woman asked, "Who was she?" "Agnes Cobb, town seamstress widow. Sharp enough to see through a wall. She looked at me like I was something stolen." "No," Boaz said, sitting down across from her. "She looked at you like something returned." That night rain came soft and steady, drumming on the roof like distant hoof-beats. She stood at the window watching at arms, crossed her breath, fogging the glass. "Can't stay here forever," she said. "No," Boaz replied, "but you can stay till you're strong." And after that he didn't answer because he didn't know. He didn't make promises anymore. He simply made space. She turned to him, her face lit by the firelight and rain glow. "What if they come looking for me?" "No one looks for the dead." She held that answer a long time before nodding slow. "Then maybe I can start living again." It was the first time she'd said anything close to hope. She slept better that night, dreamless, or at least quieter. The next morning, she stepped outside barefoot and stood in the sun like it might bless her back into existence. Boaz watched from the doorway, arms crossed, saying nothing. Her dress was still torn and her hair still wild, but there was something regal in her stance, like she hadn't been buried at all, just waiting for the right light. She looked over her shoulder and said, "If I find my name again, I'll give it to you." Boaz nodded. "No hurry." And in that moment, the breeze lifted her hair and the world felt like it might make room for her after all. The sun had just cleared the ridge line when Boaz saddled his mare and looked to the porch where she stood with her hands clenched around the hem of her new blue dress. It was the one Agnes had brought altered to fit a body that had known both hunger and survival. The shawl around her shoulders fluttered in the breeze, and her hair, now washed and braided, made her look less like a ghost and more like a woman, reborn. But the tension in her jaw said she still felt the earth under her fingernails. "You sure?" Boaz asked. She nodded. "I need to see them, the people, who buried me with their silence." He said nothing more, just helped her onto the horse, steady and careful like she might break if handled too roughly. They rode slow down the hill, the air scented with pine sap and morning dew. The sky vast and unmarred. Below the town, stirred wagons creaked into motion, hens scattered in dusty yards, and the church bell rang 8 times. By the time they arrived, eyes were already watching. Curtains twitched. Men paused. Mid-speed women tugged children closer. Boaz tied the reins outside the mercantile, then looked up to see her. Feet hadn't touched the ground yet. She was staring straight ahead, not trembling, not speaking, just bracing, like stepping into a river she knew might drown her again. Inside, the bell above the door gave a sharp ring. The storekeep looked up, then down again, just as quick. He made no greeting. Boaz picked up flour coffee, a length of rope. When he glanced back, she was running her fingers over a spool of white ribbon like it was a relic from another life. She didn't ask for it. Didn't speak at all, just moved like someone remembering how to be human in public. A boy whispered from the next aisle, "That's her. The one they found in the dirt." She didn't flinch. At the counter, the storekeep said, "We take coin, not pity." Boaz didn't blink. "You'll take what I give." On the way out, she paused by the mirror nailed to the post. Her reflection stared back like a stranger she'd met once in passing. "I look like someone else," she murmured. Boaz answered quietly, "Maybe you are." Their next stop was the dress shop. Agnes opened the door before they knocked, as if she'd been waiting. Her eyes swept over the woman in blue, then softened. "Well," she said, stepping aside, "that shawl suits you better than it ever suited me." The woman stepped, inside, fingers grazing the bolts of fabric lined along the wall. "Did I used to come here?" "No," Agnes replied, busying herself with the box of buttons. "But I think you wanted to. I wanted a lot of things." Agnes gave her a look that held no judgment. Sometimes wanting is enough to keep a body upright. While Boaz waited outside, townsfolk passed by. Some nodded, most didn't. A girl stared at him openly, then asked her mother, "Why is that man keeping her?" Her mother whispered back, "Some men like broken things, makes him feel holy." Boaz said nothing. He was used to being mistaken for something less than kind. Easier than being seen. Right back at the cabin, the woman sat on the porch steps with her arms wrapped around her knees. The blue dress pulled at her feet like smoke. "They think I'm something shameful," she said. "You're not. They think you took me for yourself. I didn't." "I know," she said, quieter now, "but it still hurts to be looked at like that." He sat beside her, far enough not to crowd her, close enough to share the silence. The pines rustled, like old men clearing their throats. "They said things about me in town," she said after a while before the wedding, "that I was too old, that my hands weren't soft enough, that I was desperate." Boza's jaw twitched. "Who said that?" She didn't answer, just picked a thread from the hem of her shawl. "My face didn't match the photograph I sent, a kind one, gentle. The only one where I didn't look afraid, but he said it was dishonest." Boys waited. "He hit me when I stepped off the stagecoach. Said he wanted a girl with cheeks like peaches, not a face carved by work." Her voice shook, but she didn't cry. "And still I stayed. I thought maybe if I was good enough he'd change. Did he?" "No," she said. "He buried me instead." Boaz closed his eyes just for a second. The weight of her words curled around his spine. Later, as dusk gathered, she rose and said, "I remember now my name," she said, it aloud, then soft, unsure. But Boaz didn't repeat it back. He just nodded. Once solemn like a vow, she looked at him. "Say it." "You did." And something in her shoulders loosened. That night, she cooked. The food was simple. Cornbread, beans, a thin stew. But it was the first time the cabin had smelled like life since Boaz could remember. She moved around his kitchen like she'd always been part of it, not as a wife, not as a servant, just someone returning to herself. They ate in silence, not the awkward kind, but the kind that makes a space feel held. At one point, she looked up and said, "Do you believe in second chances?" Boaz's answer was, quiet, worn smooth from years of weather. "I believe in moments one after the other. That's all we get." She smiled. It wasn't wide or pretty, but it was real. When she stood to clear the dishes, Boaz said, "You don't have to." She paused. "I know, but I want to," and that he thought was the difference between being buried and being alive. Outside, the coyotes howled in the distance. The sky had begun to darken. Clouds gathering low heavy with something not yet spoken, and though he didn't know it yet, tomorrow would bring a knock at the cabin door, a face from the past, a reckoning. But for now, they had warmth. They had names. And that was enough. The knock came just after dusk, sharp and deliberate, cutting through, the hush like a blade across fabric. Boaz rose slowly from his chair, his hand already resting near the rifle, propped behind the door, not out of fear but habit. He opened it to find Sheriff Jed Hanley standing there, hat in hand, eyes shadowed by the coming storm. "Evening," the sheriff said, though his voice held no warmth. Boaz said, "Nothing waiting." "There's been a sighting," Jed continued, shifting his weight like the truth was a burden he'd rather not deliver. "Lucas Bed rode into town this morning. He's looking for her, behind Boaz. She had gone, still not, vanished, just silent in that way a person does when their body's trying to hide even while standing in plain view." He say why Boaz asked. Jed's jaw clenched. Claims she ran off, says she stole something. His name, his ring, his good graces, you know how Lucas talks. Boaz did. Lucas Baird, son of a judge, full of wealth and poison, a man used to getting his way by raising his voice or his hand. The town had always turned a blind eye. Our did that. It made people squint in the sun and call it light. "Bard won't leave quiet," Jed added. "He's got men, might come up this way before morning." Boaz studied him for a long moment. "What's your role in this?" "I'm telling you now," Jed said, looking uncomfortable. "That's more than most would." "Will you stop him?" Jed's silence was answer enough. When the sheriff was gone, she came to stand beside Boaz at the threshold, the wind catching the edges of her shawl. Her eyes were dry, but far away, already looking toward whatever might be coming. "He won't leave." "Maybe," she said softly. Boaz nodded. "No." She turned to him, then something brittle behind her voice. "I can go. Leave now. You won't have to be caught in it." He didn't answer at first, just looked out toward the darkness that was creeping over the valley. "You weren't the one who dug that grave. Don't act like it's your sin to carry. I don't want you hurt." He met her eyes. "You think I ain't already been that?" Silenced her. Boaz moved inside, pulled the rifle from its resting place, and checked the chamber. He didn't like the feel of it, the old weight of war and violence humming back to life in his palms, but it was what the night now required. Outside, the sky churned thick with storm clouds. She followed him, quietly, then paused. "If I stay and he comes, what then?" "Then we face him." Her shoulders dropped slightly. A kind of surrender, but not the weak kind. The kind that came with resolve. "I want to do one thing," before she said. He looked at her. "What I want to be married before the sun comes up." The words settled between them like falling ash. Boaz blinked. "You sure?" She nodded, eyes fierce with something that wasn't fear. "If I'm going to fight for my name, I want a new one. One that doesn't come from a man who tried to bury me." He didn't ask again, just saddled the mare and hitched the cart. The chapel was down near the river and the parson lived behind it. The road was slick with mud, but the sky held back its fury for now. Along the way, neither of them spoke. At the chapel, the parson blinked blurrily at the lamplight when Boaz knocked. His hair was undone, his boots half-laced. "Boaz Mercer," he muttered. "You sick or dying?" Neither. Boaz replied. "We're here to be wed." The parson peered at the woman beside him, eyes narrowing with recognition. She didn't flinch, didn't smile, just stood, tall with her chin raised the same way. She must have stood when she arrived in this town and believed she had a future, waiting. "You're the I'm not anyone's ghost," she interrupted gently. "Not anymore." The parson studied her then, stepped aside. "Come in." The chapel smelled like cedar wood and wax. Candles burned low in their sconces. Dust swirled in the still air. The parson set it down the Bible with reverence, his voice trembling slightly as he read the words as if he too knew the weight they'd carry. When he asked for vows, she looked at Boaz. "You don't have to say anything you don't mean." Boaz held her gaze. "I've buried what I needed to bury this. This is the first thing I've wanted to keep in a long time." She nodded once. No tears, just a quiet strength. The parson asked for her name, and she gave it. Then asked what name she'd take. "Mercer," she said. "I'd like to be a mercer." Boaz slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger. Thin, gold worn smooth, and it fit without struggle. By the time they stepped outside, the sky had begun to shift. A silver lining broke through the eastern dark. The world smelled of rain and second chances. On the way back, she leaned her head against Boaz's shoulder and whispered, "Thank you, you said nothing." But he laid his hand over hers and held it there the rest of the ride. Home. Behind them, dawn began its slow arrival. And ahead the storm waited. But for now they rode side by side, not as savior and rescued, not as stranger and survivor, but as two people who had decided together that no man would write the ending of their story but them. That be why the time the sky cracked open with thunder. The newlyweds were already back at the cabin. Boaz stepped down, first offering his hand, not like a man, helping the weak, but like someone reaching for his equal. She took it without hesitation. Her wedding ring, thin gold glowing faint in the storm, light felt too small for the weight of what it meant, but she didn't care. She was his wife now, not as a hiding place, not as an escape, but as a declaration. She lit the lamp inside while Boaz stoked the fire. Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steady drumming on, the roof like war drums from a distance. The wind howled through the cracks of the old wood, and yet the room held warm. So he didn't ask her if she was afraid. She didn't ask him if he'd protect her. They'd already made their choices. By midnight, the knock came. 3 hard raps, slow and rehearsed. Boaz stood from his chair. She rose too, her shawl slipping from her shoulders like shed skin. Outside, the man waited. Lucas bared. Rain solaced his fine coat, turned his polished boots to mud. He had 2 men behind him, guns at their sides, eyes cold. Boaz opened the door, wide. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't touch the rifle that leaned just inside. He simply said, "You're not welcome here." Lucas sneered. "I didn't ask." His eyes drifted past Boaz and landed on the woman behind him. "You've got something that belongs to me." She stepped forward, her voice clear. "I was never yours. You broke your word the first time your hand struck my face." Lucas took a step closer. "You tricked me. I survived you." Her voice didn't rise. "I didn't need to. You left me to die and thought the dirt would keep your secret." For a long second, no one moved. Then Lucas glanced at Boaz. "And you think marrying her makes you a hero?" Boaz looked at the man, his jaw set, eyes calm. "I'm not trying to be a bully hero. Just a man who doesn't walk away from what's right." Lucas smirked. "You really think this town will take her?" "Word over mine. My father still owns half the land between here and the border. You think a wedding in the middle of the night changes anything?" Then came the voice from the trees. "It changes enough." Sheriff Jed stepped out of the shadows, rifle over his shoulder. Behind him came Agnes Cobb, lantern in, hand boots sinking in the wet earth, and behind her, one by one, faces emerged. Townsfolk silent, watching, no longer pretending not to know. Agnes spoke first. "You left that girl for dead Lucas, and we all heard about it. Some of us didn't want to believe it. Others pretended it wasn't our business, but the grave didn't stay closed." Lucas turned to Jed. "You're going to let this circus tell lies about me?" Jed shook his head slowly. "I'm tired, Lucas. Tired of burying truth under power. Lucas's hand twitched toward his belt, but he didn't draw. Boaz hadn't moved an inch, but the quiet around him felt like loaded tension, the kind that didn't need shouting. The woman stepped forward, again standing at the edge of the porch, rain running down her face. She looked directly at Lucas. "You don't get to bury me twice." He stared at her, perhaps waiting for fear. But there was none. Only the fierce light of a woman who had walked through death and come out wearing her own name. Lucas turned, to leave teeth-clenched rage radiating from every step. His men followed, uncertain now. The crowd didn't cheer. They just watched him go. The silence itself was the sentence when he was gone. Jed tipped his hat. "I hope you two find peace up here." Agnes stepped forward and handed the woman a small bundle. "For your garden," she said. "Seeds from my late husband's field. Things worth growing take time." The woman took them with a nod, eyes damp. "Not from rain now, but something else." She whispered, "Thank you," and Agnes, without ceremony, touched her shoulder and walked off into the night. Others followed back to their homes, their secrets, their own reckonings, but something had shifted. Back inside, Boaz poured hot water into a basin and placed it by the fire. She knelt and washed her hands. The dirt from the past finally rinsed clean. She turned to him. "I think I can sleep now." "You're safe." "No." He watched her settle into bed, eyes already drifting closed shoulders, unburdened. He stood for a long moment, hand resting on the doorframe, listening to the storm ease into a hush. Before he lay beside her, he walked out to the porch and looked up at the sky. The clouds had parted just enough to show a sliver of moon. Rain still fell, but gently now, like blessing. The next morning, the garden behind the cabin was damp and soft. He brought the hoe from the shed. She brought the seeds together. They planted in silence, where once the soil had meant graves and endings, it now held something new. She dug each hole with care. He covered each seed like it was sacred, and when they finished, she wiped her brow and looked out over the hills. "I don't want to be known as the woman who was buried," she said. "I want to be remembered as the one who climbed out." Boaz nodded then, leaned down and kissed her knuckles just once. "You will be." They stood in the sun, hands dirt-streaked breath rising, like steam in the cold. Around them the earth waited quiet, patient, ready, and as the wind swept through the trees, it seemed to carry the last whisper of a grave left empty, no longer a place of death, but a place where something wild and tender had taken root. Because some stories don't end in silence. Some stories rise back up and choose to